Thank you for joining the February 2021 VMware TAM customer webinar. This webinar is organized by the TAM organization to provide our customers the opportunity to hear great content and interact directly with great speakers that are delivering it, with the goal of making sure that you are getting the full benefit from your VMware software. So please make use of the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask any questions. And if your question doesn't get addressed today, be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. Before we get into the content today, there are just a couple of basic announcements. Our next TAM customer webinar will be on March the 18th, and we'll have the privilege of being joined by Dimitri Desmet to talk about NSXT multi-site versus federation deployments. Be sure to join us to hear more about the respective use cases for these two design options. Should be a great session. As I mentioned earlier, we want you to benefit from these sessions by interacting with the speakers. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom and we'll address them during the webinar. Also, at the end of today's session, we're doing something a little bit different. You'll be prompted to fill out a 3-question survey. The first 2 questions will be related to the value received from the specific session today and the VMware TAM webinar in general. And the third question will ask you about a topic you'd like to see in the future. Your completion of the survey will definitely help us tremendously. And for that reason, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to fill it out. And lastly, this webinar is being recorded and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. After a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. And with that, that brings us to today's topic and guest speakers. VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, or VCDR, is VMware's on-demand disaster recovery service. It's delivered as an easy-to-use SaaS solution. It offers cloud economics to help your DR costs, help keep those under control, and of course, it can be used to protect your vSphere virtual machines, replicates them periodically to the cloud, and helps recover by recovering them as needed to a target SDDC. Joining us today, we have Sazzala Reddy, Chief Technologist at our VMware in our Cloud Platform Business Unit. Sazzala has designed, built, and worked on numerous groundbreaking technologies, including the ones at Data Domain, of course, the one we're discussing today, VCDR, and also we have Michael McLaughlin, Senior Technical Marketing Architect at VMware in our Storage and Availability Tech Marketing Group. Michael is one of our many great authors on the VMware blog, and there you can find his announcement and overview of VCDR. And I believe he'll be doing a demo today. So with that, Sazzala, Michael, I'll hand it over to you to get us started.
Hey, thanks, Chris. Hey, hello, everybody. Thanks for coming to this session. Today, we'll talk about VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, in short, VCDR. I'll talk about the business case, how does it work, how does it operate, and also just do a little bit of peek under the covers of actually how we built it. And we'll do a demo, and Mike is going to do the demo for us as well. So my name is Sazzala, and I have been working on building storage products and data protection products for many, many years. And the reason I work on storage is because there are a lot of interesting problems. There's always something new, interesting ways to solve the new use cases, and the cloud provides a new way to do things. So this is kind of my career journey. So Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Sazzala. Yeah, Mike McLaughlin here. So I've been in the storage and virtualization industry for a while at places like Data Domain and Nimble and Datrium. And as a technical marketing role mostly, working closely with the products. And I'll be doing the demo today. I get first chance sometime to test drive these and love showing them to our customers. So I'll be joining you a little bit later in the session.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Yep. All right, so let's see what business problem we're trying to solve. So we did this survey we asked a lot of customers about like, hey, what's your #1 cause for disaster recovery events? And this is before COVID, of course. And the couple of things we found surprising was that ransomware was the #1 topic. It's been like that for a couple of years. I think it was not there long ago, but it was surprising to hear that ransomware is the #1 cause of DR events. And it's there everywhere. I meet a lot of customers, they're very afraid of ransomware because ransomware is a topic where I have some time to spend to dig into it and see how people actually make money and what they do. And what I figured ultimately is that for ransomware, there are only two choices you have. Either you pay up or you can fight back. So pay up doesn't mean problem is gone. Fight back is a choice. And this is kind of what we'll talk about in the, as we go along. The other one, surprisingly, was power outages. Somehow I thought it would be like hurricanes or some natural disaster, but no, actually it's just power outages and ransomware. So these are the two common things. And these days, in the digital transformation, and every company now is kind of, we need our data centers, we need our data, we need our computers to work all the time. If things are down, everything is down, customers are down, your employees are down, engineers are down. It's not a happy situation. And so DR is a critical element for every business. And I was talking to customers about this particular, disaster recovery issues. So we asked like, okay, hey, what is that really what people want in disaster recovery solution? And there are four things we have found what customers really are looking for. And I hope it resonates with you as well. See, the number one is total cost. Of course, cost matters, especially for disaster recovery. Is it insurance? Nobody wants to pay a super high price for an insurance product, right? I mean, when I get my car insurance, I'm thinking how to cut it down. But it's an important aspect of your business, and cost does matter. And cost is not just the, it comes from not just from the infrastructure you have to buy to maintain your second data center, but also the cost of operationally doing things every once in a while to test failovers, to test failback, and all of those other things you have to maintain on a steady state basis. So that's one. The second one, the reason, when there's something is down, everybody's watching you, that thing better come up, right? So you want this fast recovery. You don't want to be spending days to kind of recover. You want it to be fast so that you can move on. Everybody can get on board and then basically be back to where you were. The third thing is ease of use. So this interestingly is paradoxical. Like if it's not easy to use, then you won't test it. If you don't test it, then you're not sure it's going to work for you when you actually have a disaster. So the ease of use has this multi-pronged advantages that sometimes it's not just if you're, there's a DR event on a weekend or you're on a vacation, you need somebody who's not fully trained in IT mechanisms to actually be able to push the button and fail over and make it that simple. So there are many reasons to why to make it simple. The last one is reliability. And if the reason you have a solution for DR is that you want it to work when there is a problem. If it's not reliable, it doesn't work for you, then the reason for you to buy it actually is not really kind of worth it. This looked like simple things. Then I was talking to customers and I found that I met no single customer who has said that their DR strategy is awesome. In fact, I met a customer at VMworld a couple of years ago, and it was interesting what he told me. He told me that he prays there is no disaster event in his facilities, but if there is one, he hopes he dies in it because he doesn't want to deal with it. So I was not sure to kind of laugh or feel sad at what he said, but a lot of people feel that way about disaster recovery. It seems like a really hard problem. So let me introduce you the new product line from VMware. It's called VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. And we created this product to solve some of the issues and some of the business needs customers have, like and how can we leverage cloud for this new way of doing disaster recovery, how to make it into a SaaS, easy to use solution. So this is what we're going to talk about now. And this came through the acquisition of Datrium. I was a founder and CTO for Datrium and got acquired last year. And it's well integrated into VMware product line, and it works with VMware Cloud on Amazon. So we'll show you the demo as well. But before that, I would like to just kind of show you what it does and how does it work. So imagine you have some workloads, VMs running on your data center. It's your on-prem data center. You could be using any storage, SAN or NAS storage running in your VMware workloads. The first thing you do is when you acquire our service, the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery Service, it's very easy to acquire it, one-click deployment, simple to use. That we have this cloud services which come up, and in the purple box in between, those are our two fundamental cloud services, which comes as part of the VCDR solution. One is a SaaS orchestrator. Think of it as a control plane to manage your UI. And the other one is our file system. We built a brand new unique file system. I'll go into a little bit more detail later. It's a scale-out cloud file system. It's purpose-built for DR. And DR is particularly interesting problem because DR, it requires that we have low-cost storage in steady state and be able to run workloads when there is a need to do it. So I'll work through that. So in steady state, there is a SaaS service we call VCDR running in Amazon. You use the UI, you download this lightweight DRAS connector. We call it DRAS connector, Disaster Recovery as a Service connector. And then you set up your policies in terms of your, how frequently do you want to do backups? How long do you want to keep your backups? And set up your DR plans and all those things from the UI. And once you set up, there is continuous replication, backup replication from the production side on-prem into the cloud, and we save all the data in our file system. So in steady state, it is low cost because our file system is able to use object storage in the cloud and keep it low cost. When you do have a disaster and you push a button in the SaaS orchestrator in the UI and this failover, we will launch automatically SDDC clusters, VMware SDDC clusters in Amazon, and then live mount our file system directly as a data store into this SDDC clusters so that we can instantly power on the VMs and you can start running your workloads. So there are two choices here. One is that the SDDC clusters on the right, you can have a pilot light, which is like you can have a 3-host pilot light running all the time. Or if you don't want that option, then you can also have no pilot light and nothing running on the other side. And when you have a disaster, that's only when you provision things. There's some advantages to having the pilot light. There is a small time taken to bring up the SDDC clusters. But if you want to avoid that time and some setup costs, then you can have a pilot light where you can pre-configure things and have it ready to go when you actually have a disaster event. It's still a pilot light. It's still a small cluster. It's not the full 20 servers you need to run your workloads. So the cost still remains low no matter if you choose live like a pilot light or not. And then you start running your workloads there. The advantage is that because it's VMware on both sides, it looks the same. You haven't changed any tooling and anything like that. And finally, when you're in most cases, the data center is not dead. It's temporarily been disabled from power outage or something like that. And when you are done with your, fixing your data center in a couple of days, you push a button to fail back, and we will bring back only what is changed in the last few days. So let's say 1 terabyte changed in the last couple of days, and we'll only bring that 1 terabyte back to your data center. Because in most cases, the data center is not dead. Yeah, in the extreme case, if the data center is dead and you're building a brand new data center and then you're kind of bringing everything back, then you'll of course bring everything back. But the normal case is that it's only a small amount of changes, and that's what we bring back. And then at this point, the SDDC cluster on VMware Cloud is, can be scaled down or shut down depending on your pilot light use case or not. Hopefully that was pretty clear. So we've taken this complex, on-prem backup DR, all this data center, you have to maintain a second data center and, and maintain all this hardware and software and kind of test it. So we've taken away all that pain and we said, look, for disaster recovery, just use the cloud, use our service, the SaaS service, and you get this simple benefits of actually, just using it, leveraging it, and it's low cost. So there are a few advantages and some easy to use kind of benefits we have for the product. One is that it's operationally consistent. So there are some products out there which do take you to the cloud, and save some backups and convert the VMs when there is a problem into some other cloud format, some other hypervisor. There's a challenge there because in a disaster recovery event, do you really want to try experiments with converting your VMs into something else? And also, all your tooling will break. It's not an easy thing to convert into something else. So because it's VMware on both sides and the vCenter, it looks the same, you get this operationally consistent behavior. All your tools will work, all your networking things will work, all the scripts you have will work. So that actually reduces the burden for you. In fact, sometimes even I cannot tell the difference between on-prem and the cloud version of it because the vCenters look the same. The only way I found difference is that this logo, you see this logo, this logo happens to be green or blue. I think when we do the demo, you can notice that that's the only difference I found. But even now, I forget which which color maps to the cloud or not. So maybe it's green, I think. So that's number one. It's operationally consistent. That's important for you to simplify your DR strategy, especially in the cloud. The second one is SaaS experience, right? I mean, we as consumers, more and more we are using SaaS products. I'm sure you're using a lot of SaaS products, and so but DR happens to be still an old way of doing it. So SaaS makes it really simple. That what SaaS really means is that our job is to delight you. That and then we can steadily, from our perspective, so we can steadily keep improving our product, every month, every few weeks. So you get benefits from the continuous improvements we're doing to the product. And from your perspective, you also don't have to maintain this software, don't have to install it, patch it, all that stuff. We take care of everything. So that makes it super convenient for you to kind of use the service. And it's also well integrated with the VMware cloud ecosystem, so that it feels like a one product overall. And this is an important aspect, because part of DR strategy is, if you have a second data center, you have to keep updating all your software, just like you update your primary storage, primary data center. And by doing all these automatic over-the-air upgrades, we reduce the burden for you. And also, we use something called Lambda functions in Amazon to monitor all our components, our file system components, to make sure that if something dies, something breaks, it's self-healing. It'll fix itself. You don't have to even notice. You won't even notice that something kind of had a temporary, a few seconds glitch, because it's completely self-healing system. So those are the three things to make it easy to use. Operationally consistent. You can't tell the difference. It makes it simple for you in a DR. SaaS experience, and you don't have to kind of really maintain this piece of software. So let me stop here and see if there's any questions. Chris, are there any questions we should be answering?
We've got one question regarding what is the RPO for the solution?
Yes. So the RPO right now currently is 4 hours minimum. That's what we have for today. We are rigorously working towards a better RPO, much lower RPO, but for now it is a 4-hour window. Okay, cool.
And there is one more that just came in asking whether Azure can be used as the backend instead of AWS.
Not today. It's in the roadmap, but not today. But see, the thing is that even if you have Azure or Amazon, I think we're trying to make it so that it's transparent for you, that you get the same VMware cloud experience no matter where you go, so that, especially in DR, you don't have to really think about these things. It looks the same for you.
And what about AWS Govcloud?
I think Mike, do you have a answer for that one?
Let me go check the release, because there's Govcloud is coming out. It's a roadmap item, so you need to figure out like which region, I'll look on that while we're
yeah, I think we're making progress on it. That's why I was hesitant to give a precise answer, because like SaaS, every day we are upgrading, we are adding new features. So okay, let Mike get back to you on that when we actually when he gets a chance. Cool. So the three things. So the question then is, okay, we said SaaS, we said it's easy to use, but what are the things you have to do? And I'll be showing the demo as well, but I want to just walk you through the simple things you have to do. The first thing, of course, that you have to set up. You have to set up in the sense that you have to set up what sites do you want to protect. In some degree, you have to kind of tell us what is that you want to protect. Also, you have to create these groups for protection groups, we call them, for backup policies, and also set up some runbooks, DR runbook plans, so that you can actually have a failover plan properly set up, and some networking things, because you have to send data from your on-prem to the cloud. So it's fairly straightforward setup. So once you do the setup, and you can let it go, and then you can sit back and until you actually have, unfortunately, a disaster event. And then there is the failover, the sense that you can push a button and we will launch the workloads, and we have built-in audit reports, and so that you can have a history of what all things we have done. And I'll talk about the health checks in a minute. And ultimately, we have then a button to fail back. So it's pretty straightforward, and the demo will show you that as well. And not only can you do one-prem, like set up your to replicate to the cloud and use it as a disaster site, you can do many-to-one. Like if you have like 10 sites, you can make all the 10 sites point to the cloud and use all of these many sites to be using this one cloud site as your recovery data center and for disaster recovery. So there are many advantages in the sense that you can leverage your investments. So, if you have like 10 sites, not all sites are going to die at the same time. So there's some leverage there in the sense that the resource, like if you have a 3-host Pilot Lite running in Amazon Cloud, they can be shared across all these sites because they're all coming in, and you can have this one Pilot Lite SDDC still up and running, and then you can basically leverage it for anything when there's a failure. So this has some advantages of doing many-to-one topologies. The other, so one thing we said was low cost, and I'll talk about it a little bit more later about how the file system works, so that you get a sense of why it's low cost and why it has high performance when needed. But the one thing we mentioned earlier in the talk was that, why is DR unreliable fundamentally? It's because there are so many components generally in a disaster recovery solution that you're kind of afraid of testing it. Testing is a painful situation. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort for you to do it. So that makes it very kind of a little bit unreliable, and your drift between 2 DR test events goes out of sync. So here I'm showing you 3 graphs over here. So the top graph is showing you that if you don't do DR testing frequently, then what happens is that over time your risk of your DR actually working for you actually goes up. So then you end up in the second graph, which is you try to test your DR more often. It's a lot of resources for you. It's a lot of headache, but you will try to do it often because then you at least are not having this config drift issues, and your plan actually will work when you actually want it to. So we've taken a different approach. We said, hey, this is a problem. This is a pain. How can we solve this? So rather than you checking it every so often, we decided that we have something called continuous compliance checks, health checks built into our file system, into our overall system, so that when you make a DR plan, we will check all components of the DR plan every 30 minutes, end to end, to make sure that actually it's working, and it's going to work for you when you actually have a disaster event. So it gives you confidence that all your plans are going to work for you when you actually need them to. The second thing we have done is that we also have continuous data integrity checks. So a lot of backup products generally dump data into the cloud, and then do you know if it's going to work for you? Do you know if the data is good? How do you know your data is not corrupted? Software has bugs. Things don't work all the time. So we've done something different. We wanted confidence because customers are giving us data to store. We felt there's an obligation on our side to make sure the data is not lost. So we have a daily data integrity checks. So every instance of our file system running in the cloud, we will check all the data all the time, every day, to make sure that the data is all good. And our snapshots are immutable, that they're not, by the way, they're actually hidden. You can't even see them. So there is no attack vector to actually take down our snapshots. Because in a ransomware attack, your last resort is your data in the cloud, with our VCDR. So we want to make sure that it's solid, untouchable, and immutable. So back to the ransomware topics. The ransomware, if ransomware hits you, the question is, you pay up or you fight back. So if you want to fight back, the things we have done a bunch of things to actually kind of make this easier for you to kind of recover. In a lot of cases, when you get a ransomware attack on your data center, you don't know what's going on. So you want a clean slate to start somewhere else. So this gives you an opportunity for you, like the cloud is clean, everything is clean, you can start from scratch and go from there. That's number one. The second thing is that because you don't know when ransomware hit you, it could be 2 hours ago, it could be 5, it could be 10 hours, it could be like a half a day ago. So you do not know precisely when the ransomware attacked you. You have some signs, but you don't exactly, you don't know. You have to triangulate this problem. So you have to try experimentation. You have to try rapidly bringing up your VMs, looking at them and trying some experimentation, and then kind of doing this a few times. And that means that you need backups. You need to be able to store lots of backups for, as long as it takes. Sometimes ransomware is there for a few months. So you need this history of backups and to basically go back in time. And the second thing is that to try rapid experimentation, you have to bring up your workloads fast. So if you have to rehydrate and copy all the data from your backup system into your primary storage system, and it'll take you like half a day to do this, then you're not going to do experimentation. What you really want is kind of something like what we built is, you can click a button and you can power on as many VMs as you want right now and pick any backups from any point in time, and just come up. So that means that you can try experiments many times very rapidly to see what really works for you. And it's not just one VM kind of thing. You can actually launch hundreds of VMs. It's not a toy. You can really bring up VMs at scale and actually do experimentation rapidly. So it gives you a good kind of way to combat ransomware when you actually get hit by it. Are there any questions, Andy?
We've got a couple asking about the maximum number of VMs that can be protected.
Yes, I believe it's 1,500 today. I have to check, but we keep changing, improving that number every day. Mike, do you know?
Sure.
I believe it's 1,500 per instance. And I'm going to send out the link to the VMware config max.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Perfect. And then also, that same customer is asking about transparent page sharing, and which allows them to run higher density. Do they have access to the host profiles, ESX host advanced settings on the DR side?
Let me check on that. The part of it, this is for the ESX hosts that are in the SDDC.
Right.
So the SDDC, and we'll get into this a little bit more into the deep dive, but the SDDC is created by VMware Cloud DR, and so if that's a property that has to be managed at time of creation, it will not be available yet. If that's something that you can modify or set in the SDDC once it's created, then it's a qualified yes.
Okay.
We'll talk about that a little bit, because the connection between Prem and Cloud is evolving, and there are some future features coming out. So we can, that one I'm not 100% sure of.
Okay, I do know who this customer's TAM is, so we'll make sure that we close this loop here.
Yeah.
And that's all. Thanks.
Cool. So I want to take a peek under the hood. We generally don't talk about this in deep dive. It's because it's too, sometimes it can be too technical and too into it. But I'm an engineer. I'm proud of what we built. So I want to show you just a bit about the file system. So, okay, this is basically our two services we have in the cloud: our SaaS orchestrator and the file system. So I want to just go through each one of them, just a couple of slides. So we built this new and unique file system. We had to build a new one from scratch. It took us about 4 years with like a couple of dozen PhDs to build this. And the reason we had to build a new one is because DR is an interesting problem. Like if you look at backup products, right? So data domain, for example, or something like that. It's basically meant for low cost, and it's high-speed backup, high-speed dedupe and everything else. So, and then you store the data in low cost. But the problem with the backup systems is that they can't run workloads. So when you actually have a disaster event, you can't run workloads directly from a storage system like that, from any of these backup systems generally, because they're not designed for that. And then primary storage systems, like if you buy from any primary storage system, it could be Nimble, could be Pure, could be anything, but they are designed for high cost and high performance. So what DR really needs is this combination of like cost and steady state, because in steady state, you don't have a problem. Steady state is just storing backups, and you need this low cost kind of solution to hold your backups. And then when you actually have then a disaster event, you want it to run the workloads directly from the file system as if it's built for high performance, low latency workloads, right? So you need this combination of low cost and running workloads at high speed, which is a non-trivial file system to build, because it's like asking to have all the properties in one magical solution. So we came up with we spent a lot of time on this, and we built this new cloud-based file system. So it's kind of layered. I want one deep dive onto each one of these things, but they're fundamental to how we build these layers of file system so that we can actually solve this problem in a unique way. Otherwise, what happens is that backup products will just dump data. Otherwise, we end up with just dumping data into some object storage in S3. And what do we do with that? Like, it's not really, that's not what gives you value, because it's just storage. We're just dumping data. It's like tape. we're going back to tape days. We just dump data into object storage in the cloud, and then what do we do with this data? So that's why we had to build this new file system. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the layers and kind of why these are important and what properties they give us. At the bottom of our file system, we break it down all the VMs and VMDKs and everything else into smaller objects, and we make them into immutable objects. What that means is that once an object is created, you can't really change them, and we use crypto hashes to manage the blocks. Think of like blockchain, how that is done. It's similar in that concept that once created, you can't change these objects. And it's also AZ fault tolerant. What it means is that if your AZ goes down, doesn't matter, other AZ has it. So it's AZ fault tolerant. So you don't have to worry about your data being available to you when AZ goes down. The other thing we've done on top of it is we have this new design called a log structure file system. It's a scale out file system and it's a distributed file system design. It's that we are able to convert random writes coming in, like, VMs do random IOs. And we take that and we're able to convert that into sequential IOs into the object storage. So object storage or any device generally is very good at sequential writes. So that's what we are able to convert these random writes into sequential logs. So it becomes, you can work on really, really low cost storage in steady state. On top of that, we have this Snapstore. It's about managing snapshots and metadata and everything else. So we can store millions of immutable snapshots for as long as you need it for. And also we have this instant cloning of snapshots so that when you have a disaster, we can actually clone them and actually run these workloads. The last part, which is the most interesting. So far I talked about is how do I save data in a low cost storage? How do I make it immutable so that these objects don't get modified or deleted by somebody else by mistake or by malicious intent? But the question is, how do I run workloads when I need to? So we have this on the top, a NFS read cache on top of it. The cloud, right? You can bring up things dynamically and you can only when needed, and you can shut down things when you need it. That's what the unique properties of cloud gives you, is that on-demand nature of the components. So we're able to leverage that feature so that we can have a high-performance read cache when there is a disaster event. So you can run your workloads directly from our file system and live mount and will show up as an NFS data store in VMware Cloud SDDCs. You'll see that. And so this was what gives you that high performance when needed. So this two-layer architecture, basically the bottom layer being low cost, steady state storage, and the upper layer kind of providing you that high performance caching layer. So that's together is what gives you this low cost and fast recovery. So you don't have to compromise on features like that anymore. You don't have to compromise on this low cost or the recovery speed of things. And the other thing we really cared deeply about was data integrity, because like I said before, you're entrusting your data to us. We have an obligation to make sure that our data is safe. So all of these layers, all of these LSM trees, things like that, all these structures we have used, we check them every day to make sure that the integrity of the whole data structures are all very good, and then gives you confidence that it is going to work for you when you actually need to. The second part of our cloud services is our SaaS orchestrator. And it has three things kind of easy to use kind of workflows. One is DR test. If you want to test your DR non-disruptively, you can test it. Recovery here means failover, and then there's failback. So those are the three high-level workflows, which we'll see in the demo shortly. And it has a few things to help you kind of set up your DR plans. One is this environment mappings, mapping from one settings to others, from one place to the other. And also, if you want to sequence things in your runbook, it gives you all the options to do that. And also there's some advanced things you can do in terms of like looking at your reports, or if you want to set up your SDDC in a very easy way. So it kind of gives you a bunch of other options. So at a high level, it's a SaaS service. It's built to kind of provide you these workflows and also to do DR health checks every 30 minutes. So that was the kind of overview at the high level of what the product is, and hopefully I've given you a little taste of how we built the file system and the orchestrator. And we had to do something unique because of the nature of the DR and DR based, which requires you to have low cost in steady state and high performance when you need to run. So this is a summary kind of showing you that picture again. You have your on-prem data center, you download our lightweight VM, to basically connect back to the cloud and store your backups in steady state in our file system. And then when you have a problem, you can just instantly power on your VMs in the SDDC clusters. Looks the same for you, no matter where you go. It's the same experience, and it's on demand, means the economics will be better, the cost will be better. There's no format changes. You can get ransomware recovery in a clean state, start from where you left off, when you have a problem. It's super easy to use. We'll show in the demo, and it's all SaaS-based, nothing for you to do. We do continuous health monitoring to make sure that your plans are consistent. There's no config drift. And it's very easy to then fail back. It's optimized for that as well, so that when you push a button, it'll fail back. I found that a lot of times failover is easy and failback is almost impossible. So we try to solve that problem because we believe that failback is as important as failover. So we made sure that our failback also works really well. And it's available in a lot of places, and we keep expanding what all regions we are supporting. So this is a short list of things in the current state. So that's kind of the summary of the high-level overview of our product and how it works. And with that, let me see if any questions. Otherwise, we will switch to Mike to help us do the demo.
Yeah, there are no open questions at this point.
All right, thank you. So Mike, kick it off.
Yeah, thanks, Sazzala.
Let me stop sharing before I
go. Okay, I've shared out my screen, and
we see it.
Okay, so a couple of things here. This is the left-hand side is on-prem, the right-hand side is in the cloud, and as Sazzala said earlier, they're operationally consistent. It's kind of nice, a familiar environment for both, and I'll let you sort of dig into that little green or blue icon he was talking about earlier. But we're going to use this environment. I've got a sample lab that's actually running up in VMware Data Center, and I've got the cloud on the right is running somewhere in Oregon, wherever Amazon puts their data center in US West 2. And I have sitting in a few other windows here that I'm just going to touch on. VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery is sitting here. This is the SaaS orchestrator that's also running in the cloud, managing the basically the disaster recovery for those two sites from the prem to the cloud. And that's what we're going to get into the demonstration. What I want to do is just very quickly, a couple of slides just to kind of reset the framework. So you've seen this one. This is essentially the production site. This is our left-hand side here. We've got a running environment, and that's what we want to protect. All right, we've basically created these VMware managed cloud resources that start with our cloud-based services, the SaaS orchestrator that I just showed you the picture of, the scale out file system. It's kind of hard to show. It's a target in the cloud. I'll touch on that a little bit, but I've already got replication set up. I've already deployed the DRaaS connector. So there are some things that you do sort of on day 0, day 1, which we've already done for you today to sort of expedite the demonstration as well. And if you want to look at specifics on how to do that, happy to come back later. But this is a steady state environment where you're essentially protecting your on-prem to the cloud. Now, I've already deployed my SDDC. So this could be a pilot light that's always running. It could be a just-in-time if you have an extra hour or two to spin it up before the disaster actually strikes. And I'm actually running in a single host mode just because it's easy to demo and run through the tests. Now, the SDDC cluster that I build has to be built by VMware Cloud DR, and that's so that that purple live mount sitting there between the two boxes is established, and that's a critical piece there. Now, once I have this environment set up, and whether the SDDC is provisioned or not is really an economic decision, but once it's provisioned, then failover is fairly instant, and we're going to see that today. All right, when I execute a plan from the SaaS orchestrator, that live mount is already there, and it will essentially bring those virtual machines into inventory in the cloud and bring them to life. All right, now, that failover gives me the whole sort of VM to VM aspect, but I don't want to live in the cloud completely. All right, and eventually I want to be able to bring those back. So the Delta failback is important. So this is what we're going to go through in the demo. Some of the stuff is already set up. We're going to touch a lot on that last little bit of purple that I showed you there. All right, I want to cover two other things at a very high level because we're going to dig into them in the demonstration, but sometimes it's easier just to kind of frame them as well. So the DR plan that we're going to look at has a very complete and robust structure to it. It basically has a scope that it sets up between the sites, the mappings that need to occur from my on-prem environment to my cloud, some customizations that I may need for that plan to work in my environment. The recovery steps are the critical part here, and we're going to dig into those in a little bit more detail. And then some kind of alerting mechanism so that as these plans run, I as an administrator have an awareness of what's going on. Now, those steps that I talked about could be complete protection groups, all right? And you may be familiar with protection groups. Think of those as the policies that cover my environment. They could be individual virtual machines being plucked out of inventory and brought to life in the cloud, or they could be certain custom special actions in the plan. So all of this together gives me a very coherent capability of running. Think of this as the definition of my run book. All right. And these plans give us that sort of plan of record. And that's what gets checked automatically and consistently by the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery Orchestrator. All right. Now, one last concept, and then we'll dig right into the demo, is I've got a bunch of virtual machines in my on-prem environment. All right. And I've organized them somehow, but they may not all be exactly the same. All right, so flexible policies that allow me to use naming conventions, folder organization, tags, a couple of things that allow me to group those virtual machines essentially into here I call it app 1, app 2, app 3, okay? But what it's going to basically tell me is that those groups will be protected based on SLAs that I define. All right, and as we heard, right now the minimum RPO is 4 hours, but the interesting thing is I can run multiple schedules. All right, so my scheduling mechanism here basically instructs the DRAS connector that's sitting on-prem to take snapshots of those virtual machines and move that data to the cloud so that we have a complete representation of that virtual machine in the scale-out cloud file system that Sazzala just talked about, ready to bring into inventory. All right, now that scheduling could be every 4 hours for something critical, and it could also be every night for the same virtual machine or every week. So depending on the recovery time and the retention levels, all right, we have the flexibility in this particular solution to actually have a fairly deep repository of recovery points. And that's really important for things like ransomware or other functional aspects that you may not discover immediately. I mean, you may not want to fail over what you were just looking at an hour ago. All right, you might want to go back a little bit further and then clean things up. So the retention levels are really critical here for having a flexible approach. And then the idea that basically any supported data store in the on-prem environment is candidate for snapping those virtual machines and moving them to the cloud. All right, so what we're going to look at here, and these are just a couple of screenshots. We've got a running on-prem environment. It's sitting in that left screen in the background there. I've got an empty cloud sitting in the right screen, which we're going to jump into. And then I'm going to use VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery to basically fail over from one side to the other. All right, and with that, I'm going to put this PowerPoint away for now. All right, so let's jump into the demonstration, because I like talking about the product with the product itself, with the solution. Okay, so here's our on-prem environment. It's running, and I've got a couple of different things organized here in folders. This is a sample environment. It could be much more robust. We could literally have dozens or hundreds of these. It just makes the screen harder to read. All right, on the right side here, I have an empty SDDC, this was actually provisioned several days ago because I've been doing testing and demonstrations and sort of my background work here in the operations of it, but this is empty right now. And what I want to do is go to my VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. Now, before I start clicking buttons in here, let me just put it in context. This is essentially another service in your VMware Cloud on AWS environment. So I need to have a VMware Cloud on AWS to fail over into, and VMware Cloud DR is going to be the service that gets me to that dashboard. All right. Once I deploy the SDDC, I can actually manage that from VMware Cloud dashboard. There are some things you can't do in here that we don't want you to do, but this SDDC, once deployed from VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, is a fully functioning SDDC in your VMC on AWS region that you've placed it in. So adding additional networking, plugging in other components, like I said, there's a couple of things in the documentation we don't want you to do, like change the name of this thing as an example. All right, but we're going to jump into the product now. Okay, so the dashboard shows me a high-level topology. This Tech Marketing Labs right here, this is this environment sitting here on the left. All right, and this DR SDDC in my diagram is the empty SDDC on the right. All right, and in the middle here is my scale-out cloud file system. So I can see that I have a dashed line backing up to here. This more solid dashed line is that live mount that we talked about. So this light bubble around these two is basically the formation of this service and this service so that I can live mount copies of virtual machines that are in here that have been sent from here. So now you have a high-level topology overview of what's happening. Let's dig into the details. Let's actually get this thing working. So I'm going to go to the DR plans. All right. And I have a sample plan here called sample application. All right, and it's in a ready state. You can actually see that I've done a little testing here while Sazzala was talking. I like to test early and often. So let's pick the sample application plan. We can see that its compliance checks were run 3 minutes ago. These are run every 30 minutes. It's basically looking at my protected site, my recovery site, and a number of things about the plan itself. So if this is green, I have a very high probability that I'll be able to either test or execute this. Now, since I've already done the test and we can see that over here, I'm going to go ahead and execute a failover. All right. Does a real quick check here. That's kind of what I expect. Now, this is the interesting part, and we're going to dig into the details while this is running, but each of the protection groups that are set up for this plan. So these are those app 1, app 2, app 3 contexts I showed you just a little while ago. Each of those is being protected potentially on a different schedule and may have multiple snapshots here. All right, so this one actually has about, let's see, 102 snapshots to pick from. I'm going to take the latest one. That's the default. But each of these things, whether it's, my infrastructure services, the user desktop, any one of these, I could reach back in time. So for example, I'm failing over and I don't want the latest user desktop. I want something from, a day or so ago. I could do that in this context here. So when I'm executing the failover, I have control of the recovery point that I'm picking for that failover event. I'm going to take the latest by default. And I don't expect any errors because I just ran a test. So I'm going to go ahead and ignore those. And what we're going to see here is a set of steps. We'll look at these in a little bit more detail after we fire off this plan, but then also a little extra at the bottom here where we actually formalize the transition to the SDDC in the cloud. But let's get things running here. All right, so failover. Now, before I click start failover, what I want to do is just kind of real quick, nothing's running in the cloud right now. This is my empty SDDC. I'll do a real quick refresh on this screen here, just to kind of make sure that we're logged in and it's updated and nothing going on. Because what's going to happen is this plan's going to execute and begin to almost instantly recover virtual machines into the cloud. All right, so we click failover and the plan begins executing. So the first thing I expect to see is a database virtual machine appear in the cloud. And this will take just a moment. I can see some activity down in the bottom. It's registering the virtual machine. It should pop, oh, there it is. It's already in inventory and now it's being reconfigured per plan instructions and being powered on. So that ability to quickly recover a virtual machine from the scaled out cloud file system is one of the key aspects of this particular solution. All right. So in just a moment here, we'll see a green triangle come on this thing and we'll begin moving down the steps. All right. So depending on the complexity of your environment, the number of virtual machines, the number of steps, it may not be in 0 time, but it is happening as quickly as we can bring those into inventory and power them on. Now, this database virtual machine right here in the cloud is actually up and running. All right. And if I wanted to, I could actually begin working on it. All right. It's actually ready to go. It's running off of the scale out cloud file system while the rest of the plan is executing. So this is really important to understand, is that the order of events, that's why I showed you that DR plan real high level bit, because you can build the plans, the run books for all or part of the environment. Now, I don't know what happened back here on-prem. Actually, nothing has happened back here. And the way I've set up my environment is I can actually run these two independently, and that helps with demos. But let's just say that the database and web server and user one and all these things were dead in the water. I could not talk to this site. I wouldn't need to, all right? VMware Cloud DR is running this from the cloud to the SDDC in the cloud. All right, so while this plan continues to sort of chug along here, and we'll just take a quick peek every so often, we're seeing that the virtual machines are showing up in inventory. I'm expecting 4 of these, and then I'll get a little prompt here, because I built in a wait for user input. It helps with just verifying what's going on. It helps tremendously when I'm running tests. It allows me to have that last moment before saying failover to possibly, cancel what I'm doing. Maybe the power just came back on, or somebody found the fix and we're good, and the on-prem environment is running. So one of the questions was, can we do partial failovers? Absolutely. Whatever you decide to protect in your on-prem environment becomes part of the protection groups, becomes part of the DR plans, becomes part of the run to get to the cloud here. All right, so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and say it's okay to proceed. All right, let's continue with the failover. I already have all of my virtual machines up and running in the cloud, and I could continue with work. All right, now what's going to happen is they'll migrate in the background. So with no interruption to operations, we're basically going to move those out of that scale out cloud file system and into the fully running SDDC, which I'll be free to live in that environment until I'm ready to basically fail them back. So if we come back over here for a moment, all right, and look at the DR plans, all right. Now this one's in a running mode, so I can't edit this one because it's currently active. So I'm going to go back and grab a different plan. I have a simple plan here that let's do this one, the site prep plan, one I ran the test on earlier, because I want to walk through what's in here. All right, so a DR plan is essentially all of the instructions that you're giving VMware Cloud DR to move a workload from prem to cloud. All right, so the first couple steps, like I said, set up the context. This is going to an existing recovery SDDC. We could set plans that basically for later deployment. All right, this is an option as well. The protected sites, here's my tech marketing labs and my DR SDDC. Think of those as the bubbles that were on that top level diagram, the one on the left and the purple one that was on the right. All right, I pick those out of the inventory that I have, and I can basically stitch these two together. Now, these are the protection groups. All right, so each protection group, back to that picture of app 1, app 2, app 3. All right, the protection groups define the scope, and I can have one protection group. I could have multiple protection groups in a single plan. And that simple plan that's running right now to completion actually has it has the infrastructure services, the sample application, and a user desktop coming over as part of its plan. All right. This is just a mapping from data store to data store, mapping from vCenter to vCenter, mapping from folder to folder. This just helps keep things organized. If I wanted to go in here and move things a little differently, so infrastructure, I put an infrastructure folder in the cloud. It just makes sense to me to keep these similar. It's easier to find them later, but I don't have to do that. I have complete flexibility of making this mapping. All right, I can map the compute resources from prem to cloud, and I can map the virtual networks. Now, I like to stop on this one for just a moment, because in some cases, like during testing or during certain failover types of activities, the network that's on-prem may need to be different than the network that is in the cloud. All right, and it may actually need to be different on whether I'm doing test mapping or failover mapping. And I have the ability here to change that. So while I'm testing a plan, I may pick a different network. I might go in here and say, map this onto an isolated test network instead. So during failover, use the private network. During testing, use the isolated test network. And this allows me to build my test bubbles for non-disruptive testing to get a higher degree of confidence in when the time comes, I can click the failover button and it will proceed as expected. All right, a couple of customizations. I typically don't build these in for the demos, but this allows for very robust prem to cloud setups of IP addressing. And then if there's some things that VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery isn't doing as part of the orchestration, I can build a script virtual machine into my target environment, identify it here, and make invocations into that script virtual machine while the plan is executing. And we can see that in the steps here. So if I want to add another step, I actually have the ability to run a script in the script VM. So maybe I'm going through my steps and I'm like, okay, at step 13, what I'd like to do is have this script that I have written run, check some other things in the environment before proceeding on to step 14. All right, so I can build a very robust, very a simple or a complicated plan, depending on what I need to do. Now, we're not running any scripts in this particular demo today. We're just kind of getting it through. But I wanted to show that the capability was in there to orchestrate the orchestration even. Okay. And then the last thing about the plan is I've got two folks here, myself and Daniel, who receive alerts from the environment whenever anything changes, or maybe I get these once a week. Right? Maybe I'll have Dan get an update once a week on plans here. All right. And that essentially lets me, I'm going to not save any of those changes, but I can build a very complex and robust plan. Now, the protection groups that I talked about, all right, and this comes back to setting the RPOs and the basis for the failover. And let's go to something like user desktops. All right. And if I look here at the group, I'm doing basically just a simple user one, and I can say which VMs match that. All right. And I get one out of there. If I want to change this wildcard to maybe star desk star and look, and so it's as easy to have wildcard mapping. So there, that picks up all the desktop users. I can preclude, I can take things out. I could also add in tags or folders. This is essentially setting inventory or the membership for this protection group. Once it's done, I can then build schedules. So this one runs every 4 hours. I could have one run every night, and I could even have one run every week. All right, so I can build a very complete protection strategy here, and maybe I'll keep these for 2 months, and I might keep these for 4 months as an example. So I can have different schedules, different retention policies. I can set up a very rigorous protection mechanism. Now what's going to happen, these are going to automatically run, the schedule fires off, there is a snapshot taken, change blocks tracked, sent to the cloud. Now the interesting thing that I want to point out here is each of these point in time backups here, if I dig into one of these, let's say from February 16th, there's my desktop user. For VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery and for the purposes of live mount, and the speed with which we saw things happening over here in the SDDC, that is a full virtual machine sitting on the live mount. It doesn't have to be reconstituted. It doesn't have to be rolled forward or rolled back. It is a virtual machine at that point in time. All right. Now, even though just the change blocks were picked up and sent to the cloud, part of the magic, and Sazzala touched on this briefly, is we build essentially a complete virtual machine representation ready to go into inventory. And that's what gets us that near instant recovery time capability of this virtual machine from 2 days ago. All right. So there's a lot of stuff under the covers here that I wanted to just kind of touch on and go through as we're going through the demonstration. I'm going to take a quick look and see how my plan is doing, because I think I have a prompt at the end. Oh, we're done. So we've gone through all the steps. We've recovered the virtual machines, steps 1 through 4. That got us up and running literally in minutes, and you can see the times here. All right. Then we had our little user prompt where I said it was okay to proceed, and they fully migrated into the cloud. So we're operating in the SDDC right now. This plan is almost done. All right. What I'm going to do is go ahead and commit this plan, leave a little note for myself later, and type in commit failover. All right, if I typed right, I get a blue button. I'm going to commit this plan. Now, I want to share one more thing that comes up sort of with the environment. Now, that execution that we just did, all right, is in the reports, but I can also I'll just pick it up here because we can see that the reports for this. There's the failed over with no errors. This is the test that I did literally while Sazzala was talking. So 40 minutes before I ran a test, and then I ran this. If I want to take a look at this run book, this report, I can see here, I can create a PDF report. Easy to download, easy to share with the team. Drops right into my downloads tray here. And if we open this up, let me just make it a little easier to read. We can see here, this one ran today, February 18th, took about 7-8 minutes total time. All right, if I do the math quickly, and actually it's 5 minutes, sorry. And the time to recovery, remember there was a little pause while it was waiting for me to answer the prompt. The task completed successfully. This run book goes through and shows all the mappings that were in the plan. So the folders, the resources, the networks, all those things that I just went through very quickly in the plan construction are captured here in the run book as well. All right. Oh, there we go. It's going to send email to me. And I probably got an email while we were on this session that my DR plan was waiting for user input. I happened to be watching it, so that was good. Here's the recovery steps and the order of events. So this allows me to, one, make sure that the environment is operating the way that I want. I have a plan of record of what happened. This is also a great resource to go sit down with my team and say, okay, is this exact, did we miss anything? Like maybe we forgot, well, we got the web server, the database, the file system, we got the user desktops. Did we miss anything? Maybe we forgot the VPN or some other aspect, or app 2 didn't get into this plan. All right. This allows me to sort of dig in and like I said, have that run book capability produced for me from the environment. Okay. And if you look here, I've been doing this off and on for quite a while. All right. It gets tested a lot. It gets demonstrated a lot. We make changes in the environment. Anytime I change my prem or cloud, I try to go back and test my plans because I don't want the demos to fail any more than you want your businesses to fail. All right. So I think with that, I see a couple of questions in the QA. I'm going to pause for a moment. We kind of looked at this very high level, the failover. I'm going to do one last thing and get started before I stop here, and that's we've got our plan failed over, correct? So failover committed. All right, let's say that we've cleaned up everything on site. I'm going to go ahead and take this plan. Now I have one sitting here, but it's as easy as picking the plan, saying duplicate this plan, reverse the direction, pick the data store that I want to go back to, and I get a new plan for failback. All right, so this failback example plan here, all right, it's currently inactive. Compliance checks are running. We'll just take a moment. I'm not expecting anything to happen there because this plan moves back and forth all the time. But right now, VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery is checking the plan for me, looking at both sides, looking at all the definitions, the state of affairs. If I get a green check mark here, I'm going to go ahead and activate this plan and begin the failback. All right. Now that might take a little bit longer. It's a live demo. I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but I want to show you how simple it is to come back from the cloud, because at the end of this demo, I want to have this environment cleaned up and empty again should I need to remove it and either rebuild it or cut the cloud costs for compute. Now I still have my copies, my data in the cloud, which is good. All right. So let's just give this another moment here to sort of check itself. And let me just take a quick look at the questions and see if there's anything we can answer.
There, you got your green check too.
Oh, good. All right. And I'll get to that question in just a second about the pilot light. So we've got our check. We're going to go ahead and activate this plan and fail back from the cloud. All right. And it's going to look a little different than the failover, and I'm going to explain that briefly because this is also part of the I'll say, I don't know if the magic, but it's part of the optimization and the capabilities and the fact that we're not doing crazy sort of reconstruction of virtual machines and transformations. So what this is going to do is if we think about the on-prem site, okay, I don't know what happened here, but I did declare a disaster and those virtual machines are now running here. Okay. Now, if I go back to this environment, there's a lot more steps in here, and we're going to talk about these in just a moment. Let's get this started. This is what we call a planned failover, all right? Because I know it's going to happen. I'm not responding to an emergency, all right? And what I'm going to do is go ahead and start the fail back. So a couple of things happen. The orchestrator that we're in right now that's running in the cloud is going to go back to the on-prem site and say, okay, all the virtual machines that I need to fail back, let's get those into a known state. So it's going to power off the virtual machines on this site here. All right, and we'll see initiate guest shutdown. We're going to see a number of things happen on this site as it prepares for recovery. All right, so we're going to basically think of this, we're preparing for reentry. We're going to power off the virtual machines on the original site. We're going to restore them back to the point in time that we picked for the failover. So if you remember when I was doing the failover, I could pick different recovery point times out of my inventory. That gets recorded. And what we're going to do is roll the on-prem site back to that point so that we can apply the change blocks that occurred while we were here. So I picked a recovery point when I failed over from left to right. I'm going to reset this environment over here to that point in time, pick up the change blocks here and push them back into this environment, turn them on, and then clean this environment on the right up. All right, it's a little bit different set of steps, and this is going to take a little bit longer, but we're going to kind of let this run. But I wanted to kind of go through here is we're basically powering off, restoring the on-prem site. Then we're going to synthesize the snapshots out of the cloud and bring them back to the on-prem site, recover them. And then once that's all done, I'll get a prompt, because the plan has it, to basically say, are we good or not? And then we'll delete the protected VMs from the cloud, and this site will become empty again at the end of this demo. Okay. So we're going to let that run, because this typically takes about 15 minutes or so to do all of its steps and all of its checks. And we're not in a huge hurry right now because we're still running in the cloud. We're prepping the site. And then at a point when they're ready, we'll basically bring that last set of changes back from the cloud. Okay. Let's go back to the top for a moment. And there was a pilot light instance scaled from 3 to more. Yes, so there's a couple of things when we look at this, and let's go to the sites themselves. We have a few minutes here. So the protected sites, I have 2 already defined. A Tech Marketing Labs, which we were using for this demo, has a number of protection groups already running. I've installed 2 DRAS connectors. All right, I need at least 1. I can have up to 20. But I've installed 2. That gives me a little bit of redundancy, and it also gives me a little bit more bandwidth from prem to cloud when I'm moving data, should I have a period of large change. This is the vCenter that I've registered that has the virtual machines that I want to protect, and we can get kind of a status of how well I've protected that environment. All right. On this same view, I have my recovery SDDC. Now, if this were not deployed, I'd have a big blue button here that says deploy SDDC, and you click that, answer a couple of questions, and we build the SDDC in the cloud. And this is the SDDC that got constructed by VMware Cloud DR. We build that for you and then give you this point to reference that. Now, here I have a cluster of just 1 host. This is a time delay, and you'll actually see some messages. It's going to delete on me. I get about 30 days, and then I got to rebuild it. Or I could add hosts. If I wanted to scale this up, I could scale this up to 3, and then I could scale it all the way up to 16. Once I have a 3-host cluster, I can actually add a cluster. So I can build a very large footprint in the cloud. And back to one of the questions earlier is, the first cluster is built for you. So controlling the structure of the hosts there is currently programmed into VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. Adding additional clusters and modifying the properties of those are going to be roadmap items that we want to look at, so that you can have a very you can build the clusters and the hosts the way that you need to, as if you were in the SDDC or the VMC console. All right. I can also add networks in here. So we put in a couple of networks to stitch the SDDC to the environment so that you can get to it. I've added my app private network, my cloud DR network, the isolated test network. These were all added by me once I created that SDDC. I can add additional networks. I can add VPN networks. I can add them here, or I can add them in my VMC console if I wanted to. All right. Firewall rules are, these are the ones we ask you not to change because they're very important for stitching things together. But I can do a number of things here inside of the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery UI in managing my SDDC without actually going to the VMC console. But I also have the ability to go directly to the console to manage it. I can open up the vCenter, which is what I have open up here. And this is where I can also, if I want to delete this recovery SDDC, so at the end of this demonstration, if I no longer want to consume these resources and I've failed back completely to on-prem, I could come in here and delete this SDDC, or in some cases, I could remove hosts. Now I can, once I get to 3 hosts, I can't go smaller than that right now. So we have sort of this temporary 1 host. We have the 3 host pilot light scaled up and back to 3 hosts. So you can kind of look at how you want to manage the cloud compute economics for your DR site with typical VMC SDDC rules. Okay. NSX load balancers. So interesting question. So one of the things that I showed you earlier was that DR plan that I have set in here for site prep. All right. Now, if the SDDC is running in pilot light mode, which means it's kind of always there. All right. Let me just bring this up because I'm going to get a prompt here in a minute. If the SDDC is running and it's always here and you've modified it and you're running things in there, and this is actually a really good case for a pilot light, is you built the pilot light and you put a couple of core capabilities in there. Maybe you've got some load balancers, you've got some VPN connectivity, things that stitch your prem and cloud together. Maybe HCX is running between the two and you don't want to tear that down. All right. You want to leave the smallest footprint possible to keep that running, knowing that you're going to need 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 hosts should the application workload fail over. All right. Or part of the application workload. So we only failed over a small subset of this environment today. We don't know what this environment's full setup is, or what dependencies or what failure it just incurred. Okay, so there's a number of things that are part of the design and planning, and we actually have a session coming up with the VMware professional services team, which is going to go into deep details about, like, here's the tools, here's what you can build, and here's what makes sense under best practices. So great question. I'd say that you could use this to fail over the load balancers and leave them there. They could be they could be one of the first steps in an existing plan, or they could be part of the pilot light infrastructure that's up and running and using a few, kilowatts of energy or whatever they take to run, in a lower state of operation here. Okay. I can see a lot of activity going on down here in my site. It looks like it's probably getting ready to bring back some of these workloads. Here we're restoring the virtual machines. We've got one more set, and then we should be ready to start grabbing that last snapshot from the cloud. Okay. And I can watch that over here in the tasks as well, so I can see that it's still failing over. If I get to a user prompt, I can click on that link over there. All right. So real quick, I kind of went through this. I'm going to jump back to PowerPoint for just a moment, but we've got essentially sites. Now, my protected sites are already set up. Those are sort of day 0, day 1 activities. My SDDC was already deployed, all right, and that's something that takes 90 minutes to 2 hours to construct from scratch. So rather than doing that in this demo, we already had one running. So these were already deployed. If I wanted to add a new site, it really is simple though. If I wanted to add, hang on, go here, I want to set up a new protected site, and let's just call this demo. And we'll run this one in Los Angeles. All right, we're going to get a new site. All right, and it's as simple as coming in here and saying, okay, I'm going to grab the URL of the connector. I'm going to log into my vCenter site, register my connector, all right, and then register my vCenter, and then build protection groups. I'm going to go through this simple step here. And once I've done that, I have another protected site. And what I'll get is another bubble on the top diagram here. So there's There's the yet to be completed demo site that I've already set up. I can have up to 20 of these protected sites in a single instance as well. So I can have hundreds of terabytes of cloud backup, up to 20 protected sites. Right now, I can have one recovery SDDC. That will be changing in future releases, but in an instance of VMware Cloud DR, I'll have one SDDC, and you can kind of get a summary here of what's going on. All right. And I think that kind of wraps it up. Go ahead.
There's a question here. I don't know if it's for you or for Sazzala, but can you help us understand how VMware Cloud DR fits in with other parts of the VMware Recovery Protection Solutions, specifically Site Recovery Manager, Site Recovery Cloud Service?
Yes, so a great question. We're sort of working through all of that in some material to help with that, because they do solve slightly different things. So the first one is if it's on-prem to on-prem, Site Recovery Manager is the solution. All right, so VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery requires an on-prem and a cloud. All right, so if it's prem to prem, it's going to be SRM. That's sort of the first cut point. Once you start to look at failing over to the cloud, all right, VMC on AWS, you now have two choices. VMware Site Replicator, Site Recovery, VSR, is built off of kind of a VMware Replicator and SRM on-prem approach, and has actually, I think, if we look, one of my sites here, I've actually started to load VSR into to live with the VCDR solution. Now, if you're doing prem to cloud, now you have to start looking at, and I'll just say budgets, time and money budgets. And that's really going to be the main thing. Is they're probably more similar than different. But with VMware Site Recovery, you will have to have a footprint in the SDD in the cloud. You'll have to have an SDDC running here so that the on-prem can continually replicate into the SDDC. With VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, we're replicating into the scale-out cloud file system. So this binding here of the SDDC, the compute resources, the pilot light, the 3 to 30 hosts or whatever, that is one of the key variables between VSR and VCDR. All right, is where they send their data, and sort of the always-on approach. So if you want an on-demand solution, or you want to have a very small pilot light footprint, VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery is the better budget. All right. Now, time-wise, we saw how fast we could recover from the live mount, but we also had to deal with 4-hour recovery points. All right. So VSR has slightly tighter recovery points right now because it's using a different change block tracking mechanism. So we can dial that one down to like a half an hour. All right, so if you have tighter RPOs, you might have to budget more cloud resources and use a slightly different solution. There's kind of a decision tree we're going through, but basically all three VMware products are trying to take on-prem workloads, protect them with the notion of protection groups or policies, build DR plans or run books around that, and send the data somewhere else, either to another on-prem site or into the cloud. All right. One of the other things that's slightly different is if you already have a cloud footprint and you want to send that somewhere else in the cloud, VMware Site Recovery can do that right now. VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery will be able to do that later this year. So it really comes down to sort of the size and the urgency of the bubbles and whether you want to have them. I mean, if you think about this bubble diagram, that's really the way to tie it up. If these two things are replicating to each other, it's SRM. If they're replicating directly to the SDDC, it's VSR. And if they're replicating to the scale out cloud file system, you have the option of using VMware Cloud DR as your solution. All right.
That's really helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, it's a little confusing. I know that, and this is all part of VMware. This part of why the Datrium acquisition occurred. I mean, there's some technology here that makes really good sense, some economics that we can layer in, and I think what you're going to see. This is me talking a year or so from now, is a common VMware DR strategy that says, where's the left side and where's the right side? You know, I mean, really, you want to just get to this point and think about the world in these terms. It's like, I got some stuff on the left and it ain't working, or I need to get it out of there, or where'd my left side go? And I want to be able to bring up the right-hand side here, either in another on-prem site, if I have that mechanism, or in the cloud, or in another cloud. I mean, right now, this is in AWS. A question earlier about Azure. Who's to say that these couldn't be two different clouds in the future? All right. The idea is your virtualized workloads and operational consistency. I look at it as the left and right hand problem. This is where we're headed. Is I've got stuff on the left and I need to protect it to run on the right when I want to. Okay. Oh, real quick, I just want to bring back this for just a moment, because we kind of went through this and we're failing it back right now. But I touched on a number of things today from the demonstration, and some of this was operational, failing over, failing back, getting run books, and some of this was the mechanics of how the environment is built. So I just kind of wanted to lay that out so that folks can kind of look at that. And then I think, let me see if I have, this is a summary slide I like to throw in at the end. All right. So on the right-hand side, we want simpler management, cost efficiency. We want to make those budget trade-offs and have higher degree of confidence that things are going to work. Well, we get that by building a couple of things in our environment: protected sites, protection groups, and DR plans. And as I said, those concepts in the middle actually apply to SRM, VSR, and VCDR. All right, they're the fundamental building blocks that, as a VMware, sort of site manager, you need to build those to get from left-hand to right-hand side. And then the parts that we looked at today were the components of VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery. We were in the SaaS orchestrator a good bit of today. The scale-out cloud file system was just there for us. That's where the snapshots were. That's where the replication was going. And the DRAS connector, we didn't go through installing that, but those are just basically these appliance VMs that are easily installed into any on-prem site to begin connecting that to VMC on AWS. So it's it really is intended to be easy. And Sazzala talks about being able sort of just to delight customers in the use of it. I love showing these products off because they really are fairly simple to drill through and manage the two sites. And we're going to be shutting this down and getting the prompt whether to delete these in just a moment or not. Okay. And with that, we've got about 8 minutes to spare, I believe.
Yep. So do you want to wait for the prompt here or wrap up?
Well, we can wrap up. I'm just going to kind of see where it is in the steps. We're getting pretty close. Probably still a couple of minutes away. I mean, I've run this through. I mean, each of these steps takes a minute or two. I mean, as soon as we get to 29, I'm going to say okay, and it's going to start deleting the environment. I don't know if you guys want to stick around for that, or I can send a proof of life snapshot at the end. get out today's newspaper, hold it up, and go SDDC cleared.
Right. Based on what I've seen, I'm pretty confident. But maybe what we could do is this. Sometimes when we have a bit of a layover like this, we'll ask everyone if they have any lingering questions. You can raise your hand and maybe we can even unmute you. So does anyone on the call have questions? Raise your hand if you do.
Kind of watching for questions here. Yeah, like I said, rather than opening another topic, but it really is. Let me do a little cleanup while we're talking for the next session, because that demo protected site that I created, we're going to get rid of that. It's easy to clean that up.
I think your audio started buzzing a little bit there. There, that's better.
Okay. Leaning on the cable. I'll have to check that later. Okay. And then in the protection groups, let's just touch on a couple of things, just to reiterate, since we do have a minute, and I'm going to kind of push maybe till the end, because I'm going to have to watch this and clean this up myself anyways. But I've got a number of different protection groups here. This one I've actually got set up here for ransomware. let's kind of share that with you because I think this one is set up the way I was talking about. So this is protecting my desktops. I'm just looking at one set of applications and I've set up 2 protection schedules in here. So I'm doing every 4 hours. That's the lowest I can go with the current release. So I want to get a good snapshot just to protect my users. And I'm keeping that for a week. So that's roughly 6 per day. That's like 40 some snapshots. And then I've decided that daily and at midnight, I'm going to take another snapshot and I'm going to keep those for 2 months. So I'm going to have another 60 recovery points. So when this plan finally gets up in fully steady state, I'll have about 100 recovery points that I can pick from if I want to use this plan for recovery. All right. And I think ransomware is one of these things that's very interesting. So I'm just going to take a moment and drill on this just a little bit more because I have the ransomware desktops plan. And I want to just kind of show you a little thing that I've put in here. Now, this isn't intended to recover the entire environment. In my recovery steps, I've chosen to recover a single desktop and then prompt the user. All right. So let's just say that there was not just 4 or 5, but 100 of these things in that group being protected. And I wanted to kind of quickly recover from ransomware. How might I do that? All right. Well, with this particular little sort of example here, when I run this, let's just kind of go through it since we have a moment here. I can go and pick one of those 100 snapshots that I want to recover to. I'm going to leave those on the scale out file system. All right, this makes things very fast. And we're going to just recover the single desktop. And I'll just kind of share this with you since we do have a minute. And you can see how quickly this could happen. So we're basically recovering that desktop into my environment here. Now, oh, actually, I picked the desktop user 1. He's still in inventory. All right, so we'll have to cancel that and change the plan. But the idea would be to pull one back, look at it, see if it's what I want, and then iterate again. So we can do this. Since I have a minute, I'm going to go in here. We'll take desktop 2 instead as an example. And I think what you're seeing here, and I know I'm kind of doing this on the fly with a live demo, it's always fun, is how easy it is to actually iterate through a scenario. So I've picked a different desktop in that protection group to actually do my testing with. Now, desktop 2 should show up in this environment in relatively short order. All right, so it's recovering desktop 2 over here. And I'll say a desktop 2 show up in my inventory in the cloud. Now, this is a clean environment. So if you think about the issues of virus and ransomware, anything, I've got a clean slate on the right here. It was empty at the beginning of this session. And I'm bringing this VM in here, and it's going to get basically configured and powered on. And as soon as it gets powered on, I'm free to go explore what state it's in. All right. And if I get done looking over here and I'm like, oh, that one's broke too, then I can basically cancel and clean up. Or if I say, this is good, it's a good copy, and continue, it's going to recover the rest of the virtual machines and files in that protection group. So it's going to let me say, okay, the one that I sampled was good, let's bring the rest on. So when you're thinking about ransomware recovery, all right, how fast can you find the good stuff to come back to and know that it's clean? And how fast can you iterate over that? Because if I said, no, let's cancel and clean up and try a different version. All right, we took the default latest version. All right, this is basically going to delete that virtual machine from inventory. And I acknowledge this, and we look over here and desktop 2 is gone. I could try that whole scenario again and use a different snapshot. Let's go pick this one. All right, and so I can very quickly iterate in my inventory that I've set up with my protection groups and get to a good known point that is where I want to start from. Now, this doesn't have to be just ransomware. This could be like you just realized that not only did you lose power, but your database corrupted itself 30 minutes ago because of that. How do you find the right point in time? So building that into the environment so that it's easy to do is fairly simple to do as well. And there we go. The moment I've been waiting for. And 2 more to go. Boom. There we go. We're done. And we've basically failed back from the cloud in time. And that plan is now sitting deactivated. I've got a PDF report of the failback. I have a completely clean SDDC, just like we started with, and we're back up and running on-prem. Desktop user 1 is restored to the point that we had over here. And at that, we're at the hour or the half hour.
Wow. Pretty cool stuff. I have to say, this was a really helpful, great presentation. So Sazzala and Mike, really appreciate you taking the time to share all this great info with us.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Chris, and thanks, everybody. Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, so with that, we mentioned at the beginning, you're going to be presented with a survey at the end of this webinar. Please do take some time to complete that. We would really appreciate it. And also, this presentation was recorded, and your TAM will make it available to you. Please join us next month. We'll be looking at NSX multi-site versus federation, and we look forward to seeing you for that on March 18th. Thank you.
Thank you.